This waitress got fired for buying a veteran's lunch. 30 minutes later, 5 black SUVs surrounded the cafe. Part 1. The plate that got her fired. Get the F out of my cafe. The plate hadn't even touched the table yet when those words exploded through the room like a shotgun blast. Customers froze. Forks hung in midair. The only sound that followed was the soft clink of mashed potatoes hitting ceramic as Alyssa Wren, her hand still outstretched, looked up in shock. Greg Halbrook didn't just shout it, he spat it like a sentence loud, brutal final. And no one, not the toddler screaming in booth 2, not the trucker refilling his coffee, moved a muscle. So here's the question. Would you fire someone for feeding a veteran? And if you saw it happen, would you say something or would you just keep eating? Tell us in the comments, would you have stood up for her or walked out in silence like the rest? Because what happened next, it started with a meal and ended with 5 black SUVs surrounding Sawyer's Grill in Montrose, Colorado. But let's rewind. It was a Tuesday morning. Rain tapped the windows in a steady, tired rhythm. Inside Sawyer's, the air smelled of burnt bacon and industrial coffee. Alyssa Wren, 26, had been on her feet since 5:30 a.m. Her apron still carried a tea stain from an earlier spill. Her sneakers were soaked, but she smiled when people asked for ketchup. Then the door opened. He didn't so much walk in as drift hunched over boots, dragging slightly soaked from head to toe. White beard scruffy. Jacket military issue faded green. A scarf frayed at the edges. Alyssa saw him the moment he entered and paused. He didn't order, didn't speak, just stood there like someone who had gotten used to being invisible. She approached quietly. "Sir, are you all right?" His voice cracked. "I think I was supposed to meet someone here. Or maybe not. I just needed to come in." He looked around like he was trying to remember what a warm room felt like. Around his neck, a set of dog tags. On his sleeve, a patch so old it was barely readable. Second Recon. 1971. She guided him to an empty booth in the back. She didn't ask permission. She didn't ask Greg. She just sat him down gently, slid a forgotten blanket across his shoulders, and walked straight to the register. $10 from her own tips. "Meatloaf, mashed, carrots if you got 'em," she said to the cook. "Extra gravy." Alyssa placed the plate in front of him like it was a Thanksgiving dinner. A glass of warm water, a slice of cornbread. He stared at the food, stared at her. "You didn't have to." "I did," she replied. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." And then she turned to check on another table. That's when it happened. Greg Halbrook stepped out from behind the counter, his shirt tucked so tight it looked like it could split, his voice smooth and poisonous. "You mind telling me what the hell that was?" Alyssa stopped in her tracks. "I paid for it. From my own tips." Greg didn't blink. "You don't make policy here. We don't hand out food to anyone off the street. He's not anyone. He's a veteran." Greg's smirk twisted. "You want to feed dirty old vets, Alyssa. You want to open a soup kitchen, then get the fuff out of my cafe." The air snapped. Alyssa's face flushed, but not from shame, from anger. Her voice shook, but her spine didn't bend. He looked hungry. "So I fed him. If that's wrong, then maybe you need to rewrite your rules." Greg's voice dropped to a sinister whisper. "You're done here. Apron. Now." And that's when the silence really hit. The kind that stabs deeper than yelling. No one moved, no one helped, not even Lily, the teenage hostess, who usually looked up to her like a big sister. The cook peeked out from the back, eyes wide, lips pressed. The veteran tried to stand. "She didn't do anything wrong," he whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Greg turned to him like swatting away a fly. "Sir, eat your food and stay out of staff business." The old man sat back down, trembling. He reached into his jacket, pulled out something small metal and placed it softly on the napkin next to his untouched plate. A purple heart, bent at the edge, still gleaming under the overhead lights. I was at a show, he murmured. 19's at a recon unit. Most of them didn't come home. He looked down again, quietly. Almost to himself, he said, "They'll come. They always do." Greg scoffed, not even bothering to look. Alyssa took off her apron, folded it, placed it on the counter, and walked past the old man without saying a word. But as she passed his booth, she gently rested her hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's really okay." Outside, the rain had picked up again. She stood at the bus stop, her back to the cafe. Her hands gripped the apron like it still meant something. Inside, Greg strutted behind the counter, basking in the control. A few customers paid. Some looked away. One or two left early, but no one said a word. At the back booth, William Roy Thatcher, recon vet, 72 years old, picked up his fork. His hand shook. He took a bite and whispered, "They'll come." What did he mean? What was he waiting for? Stay with us? Because what happened next, you're not going to believe. And if you ever saw someone do the right thing and suffer for it, tell us in the comments. Because sometimes the quietest people leave the loudest legacy. Next, the badge, the silence, and the shame. Part 2. The badge. The silence and the shame. They didn't just fire her. They humiliated her for doing what was right. He didn't even finish the cornbread. Inside Sawyer's grill, the plate sat half-eaten. The gravy had cooled. The cornbread had crumbled where his trembling fingers tried to break it. And the purple heart, it was still there, glinting under the cheap fluorescent light like a relic no one respected anymore. Outside, Alyssa sat on the edge of a rusted bench near the bus stop, arms wrapped around her apron. Her name tag still pinned on. Her lips pressed shut, but her eyes, they screamed. Across the street, the laundromat's neon flickered like a bad omen. A woman pushing a stroller glanced at her, then looked away. That was the part that stung most, not just the firing, but the silence that followed it. The silence from Lily, from the cook, from the customers who just watched it happen. Have you ever seen someone punished for being kind? Type the word respect in the comments if you believe she didn't deserve that. And if you think what happened to her is rare, think again. Because William Roy Thatcher had seen it all before. Back inside, he sat alone. He didn't leave. He didn't complain. He just stared at his food like he was trying to swallow more than just meatloaf. The rain tapped the window beside him, and his breath fogged the glass in slow, steady clouds. Greg Halbrook leaned on the counter like a king. He smoothed his tie and looked at Lily with smug certainty. "Let that be a message to the rest of you," he said. "No handouts, no bleeding hearts, and no damn exceptions." Lily didn't answer. Her hands shook as she reached for the next order slip. Her eyes darted to the booth in the back where the veteran sat quietly, shoulders curled forward, like he was trying to disappear into himself. At that same moment in the back kitchen, Louise the cook pulled out his phone. He stared at it, thumb hovering before opening a contact labeled Walter, Sunday check-ins. He typed 6 words. "Something's wrong with Roy. Bad. Now." He didn't wait for a reply. Because the truth was, William hadn't called anyone. Not yet. But Louise knew that something about him, the way he whispered, "They'll come," didn't feel like delusion. It felt like a warning. In the dining room, the veteran finally moved. Slowly, he reached for a paper napkin and folded it twice. He picked up the purple heart, placed it gently inside the crease, and pressed it flat with the palm of his hand, like it was a letter he once carried through jungle mud. Then he set it back down, still visible, still shining. A couple near the front whispered to each other, A man in a business jacket looked toward the door, uneasy. A woman near the window, a retired nurse named Jean Harlow, whispered, "That's not just some drifter." And still Greg scoffed. "He's just a guy looking for sympathy," he muttered. "I've seen the type." But he hadn't. He hadn't seen that type. Because that type doesn't yell, doesn't beg, doesn't record videos. They just leave medals behind and wait to see who still remembers what they stood for. Back at the bus stop, Alyssa's phone buzzed. She didn't look at it right away. The rain had picked up, soaking the shoulders of her hoodie. She pulled the apron tighter like it was some kind of armor. A message flashed across the screen. Her sister. Another reminder that life moved on: weddings, dinners, normalcy, even when your world just collapsed. She almost deleted the message without reading it. But then another one came in. Unknown number. "We saw what you did. Don't regret it." No name, no context, just that. She blinked. For a second, the rain on her lashes made her feel like she might cry. But she didn't. Inside the cafe, Lily dropped a glass. It shattered. Everyone jumped. Greg sighed loudly, turning back with that condescending tone that made the air itself feel heavier. "Careful, sweetheart, unless you want to join your friend out in the rain." But Lily said nothing. She just knelt, hands trembling, and cleaned up the glass. At the back booth, William watched her, then looked down at the folded napkin, then up again. Slowly, as if dragging 100 pounds of memory, he reached into his coat. He pulled out a second item, a laminated photo. 4 men, mud-stained uniforms, a ridge behind them, Vietnam. He set it beside the medal. Someone at a nearby table stood up, then sat back down. No one said a word. But the tension in the room, it shifted, like a tide coming in. Quiet, relentless, familiar only to those who know what it means to wait for backup that might never come. And then William did something no one expected. He took out a small flip phone. Yes, a flip phone. He opened it, dialed one number. It rang once. Then he hung up. Didn't leave a message, didn't speak. But the signal, it had been sent. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, Louise leaned closer to the window and whispered to Lily. "You all right?" Lily shook her head. "He scared me." Greg Louise didn't ask. He knew the answer. "She looked out for me," Lily said quietly. "First week I worked here, I didn't even have gas money to get home. Alyssa gave me $20 and never said a word." Louise nodded. "She ever tell you her brother served in Afghanistan? 2 tours, Purple Heart." Lily's eyes widened. Greg clapped once, loud. "Let's move people show's over." But it wasn't. Not even close, because just then another phone buzzed. Not Alyssa's, not Louise's, not Lily's. It was Greg's. He looked down, frowned, read the message, his brow furrowed. Then he looked up. And for the first time, he looked nervous. Something was happening. And he wasn't in control of it. The air had changed, not because someone shouted, but because someone had dared to stay calm. Because a man with medals sewn inside his coat and grief stitched into every line on his face had decided to say nothing and wait. And when men like that wait, things move. If you want to know what arrived next at that quiet cafe in Montrose, Colorado, the moment 5 black SUVs rolled up in the rain, then don't blink. Because in the next part, what walked through that door wasn't just backup, it was reckoning. Part 3. The Arrival. You just fired a woman for doing what the goddamn VA failed to do for 40 years. It started with tires, thick, deliberate, unhurried, the kind of sound you don't forget if you've ever been in uniform. The rain hadn't stopped, but the town had. People looked out windows. A kid dropped his soda. Inside, Sawyer's grill fork stopped mid-air again, but this time it wasn't out of confusion. It was instinct. 5 black SUVs, no plates. Matte finish. Quiet engines. Each one stopped in perfect formation outside the cafe, like they were taught to do it back in Quantico. When the doors opened, it didn't feel like a visit. It felt like deployment. The first man to step out wore his stripes like armor. Retired Colonel Nathaniel Rourke, former commanding officer, 1st Marine Recon, silver hair cropped tight, posture like steel. He didn't glance around. He walked straight for the door. Behind him, Master Sergeant Rafael Ibarra Boots that had walked Iraq and Haiti. Lieutenant Paula Grant, sharp silent eyes like she saw through lies. Captain Elijah Rhodes, the only man who still wore his field cap in civilian life. And finally, Gunnery Sergeant Donnie Van's tall black, missing part of his right thumb. The one Roy once saved under mortar fire. They didn't say a word outside. They didn't need to. Because inside the Purple Heart was still on the table. And William Roy Thatcher had waited long enough. Greg Halbrook looked up as the bell rang. He froze. For a man who once handled press briefings for a mayoral campaign, Greg looked like a child caught forging a signature. Colonel Rourke scanned the room. He didn't look at anyone in particular. Until he did. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud, but it sliced through the room like ice through glass. You just fired a woman for doing what the goddamn VA failed to do for 40 years. And that was when everything cracked. No one spoke. A salt truck rumbled by outside, but no one looked. A waitress in the back gasped softly. William didn't move. He just nodded once, like he'd heard the exact sentence he knew someone would say eventually. Rourke stepped forward. She gave him food. No permission, no press, no agenda, just a plate and some damn dignity. He pointed at the Purple Heart. And you humiliated her in front of him. Greg opened his mouth, lips twitching. This is a private business. You're a disgrace in slacks. That came from Vance. Deep voice. No inflection. Just truth. The woman near the window, Jean, the retired nurse, stood slowly. I watched that girl carry trays for my husband when he was dying of ALS. You didn't fire a waitress. You erased the only decent thing this town had left. Greg blinked. I don't need a lecture. You need a lawyer, muttered Ibarra, cracking his knuckles without breaking eye contact. A camera phone clicked. 2 teenagers near the door had their devices out now, capturing every second. Greg noticed. His hand twitched toward his pocket. Maybe he thought about deleting the footage. Maybe he thought about running. But instead he stepped forward. She broke the rules. I don't care who he is, he said. Paula Grant, stepping next to Rourke, dragged a bleeding Marine across 40 yards of enemy fire in a shower. That Marine was my uncle. He died 2 years ago, still calling Roy his brother. Greg looked over at William, still seated, still quiet. That's not in the file. Because real heroes don't need files, Rourke growled. They have scars. And then William finally spoke. His voice was soft, measured, like gravel in memory. She saw me, that's all. For the first time in weeks, someone didn't look through me. She just asked if I was hungry. He turned to Greg. You saw a problem. She saw a person. The silence after that felt eternal. Someone at the counter started clapping. It wasn't loud, not a cheer, just slow, deliberate. Then another, then Lily. Greg turned red. This is a setup. This is accountability, Vance snapped. Then something unexpected happened. A man in a construction vest stood near the back. Charles Fenner, local contractor, son of a Korean War vet. My company does veteran housing. I saw the video. Alyssa's welcome to work for us anytime. She's already got more honor than most folks I've hired. Greg stepped back, hands out. You people think she's a saint? She handed out a plate of meatloaf. She handed out humanity, Colonel Rourke said, which is more than this place has served in years. Lily stepped forward, eyes glassy, but voice steady. She gave me a ride home when I had no one else. She bought me groceries and never once asked for anything. Greg turned toward her. You're all fired then. If you want to follow her out, do it. Louise the cook tossed his apron on the counter. Gladly. And then came the twist no one expected. Rourke reached into his coat and pulled out a manila envelope. He dropped it on the counter. Cease and desist. Filed this morning. You used Roy's name and likeness in an online ad for Veterans Day brunch 3 years ago. Without consent. Greg's face went white. You used his face to sell pancakes? Rourke said, venom in his voice. But couldn't spare him a damn sandwich. The camera phones captured everything. And the final nail, William stood up, folded the Purple Heart, walked toward the door. He paused beside Greg. You thought I was alone, he said. I'm not. I never was. And then they left. All 5 officers. William. And with them half the room. The door closed softly. But the echo it left behind was thunder. Don't let quiet courage go unseen. Forward this story to someone you admire. Share this if you've ever seen dignity speak louder than power. And if you believe kindness should never cost someone their job, because sometimes the quietest acts deserve the loudest echoes. Subscribe to hear more true stories that remind us courage isn't always loud, but it's always needed. Part 4. Reckoning Day. You don't run a cafe, you run a disgrace. The video hit 40,000 views before Greg Halbrook even opened his eyes the next morning. By noon, it was on every veterans Facebook group across Colorado. By dinner time, it was national. In the footage, his voice rang loud and clear. Get the F out of my cafe. Then a Purple Heart in the frame. Then 5 black SUVs. Then silence, the kind that wraps around a disgrace so tight it chokes. The camera didn't shake. It didn't need dramatics. The truth was already loud enough, and if you've ever watched someone lose everything without even realizing it, this was that moment. Across Montrose, Colorado, people weren't just watching. They were talking. Retired army mechanics, church choir widows, substitute teachers, they were rewinding, pausing, quoting, and the words that spread faster than wildfire were, she gave him food, he gave her humiliation, they gave him justice. Send this video to a community you know would rise too. Tag someone who would never stay silent when things go wrong. But let's go back to the cafe the morning after. The neon sign at Sawyer's Grill blinked erratically. Inside, the tables sat empty. The breakfast rush didn't come, neither did the regulars. Lily stood behind the counter alone, her hands trembling as she poured coffee for 2 out-of-towners who hadn't seen the footage yet. She hadn't said a word since the night before. Neither had Greg. Greg sat in the back office staring at the comment section. This man shouldn't be trusted with a mop, let alone a business. That veteran deserved better. So did she. This is why people lose faith in humanity. He tried to draft a statement. We regret the misunderstanding. Delete. Due to recent events, we value your feedback. Delete. Everything sounded weak. Everything sounded like a man trying to keep the ship from sinking after he'd torn a hole in it himself. Then came the call. Eileen March, his silent investor. She wasn't yelling. That was worse. I put up my money because you said you respected the veteran community. That was the pitch. Remember, Greg stammered, I didn't know who he was. I just enforced policy. Policy, she snapped. You kicked a man out who has more honor in his shoe than you have in your entire resume. He tried to defend himself again, but she cut him off. I've started the paperwork. The cafe is being appraised. We're done. The line went dead. Outside, a group of students from Montrose High were holding hand-painted signs. Dignity is not a violation. Veterans deserve more than leftovers. Justice for Alyssa. Greg walked out to see it for himself. No one yelled, no one threw anything. That would have been easier to deal with. But the quiet that was devastating. The quiet of people turning their backs, walking away. Inside, Louise returned briefly, not to cook, just to retrieve his apron and leave a note. It read, "You ran this place like a business. She ran it like a home. Guess who we came back for?" Greg tore the note. But the camera in the corner saw everything. The barista had forgotten to shut off the cafe's internal live stream, a leftover system for promotions. People saw it. Again. By the afternoon, Sawyer's Yelp page had 300 new one-star reviews. The landlord called, so did the veterans group across the street, and then CNN Local sent a crew. They didn't want to speak to Greg. They asked for William Roy Thatcher, but he wasn't there. He was sitting quietly outside the Danner Veterans Network, building a warm cup of coffee in hand, staring at the street like it still held stories he hadn't finished living. Beside him, Alyssa, in a clean button-up, no apron, no stains. Just peace. She hadn't spoken much since the incident, not because she was afraid, but because deep down she didn't need to prove anything. That evening, a town hall was called. People packed into the community center, folding chairs, clipboards, a projector showing still frames from the cafe. The image of the Purple Heart on the napkin became iconic. A mural was planned. Local business owners pledged to support a new cafe run by veterans. Alyssa was invited. She sat near the back. When her name was called, she hesitated, but William placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You already spoke louder than most people ever will," he whispered. She nodded and walked up. She didn't give a speech, she just said, "I didn't feed a veteran. I fed a human being, and that should never require permission." And then she stepped down. The room applauded, not wildly, not performative, but long, sustained, real. Back at Sawyer's, Greg sat alone. The cook gone, the waitstaff gone, even the dishwasher. The only thing left was the Purple Heart. Someone had returned it, left it taped to the door with a note, "You don't deserve to touch this, but you need to see it one more time." Greg opened a bottle of whiskey behind the counter. He drank in silence. But the voices online never stopped. The phone rang. He didn't pick up. Then just as he lifted the glass again, a knock at the door. It was a boy, 13 maybe, in a scout uniform. "Sir," he said quietly, "my grandpa said you're the reason he finally told us what happened in Nam. He saw the video. He cried. Greg didn't know what to say. He said to tell you, you reminded him why silence isn't strength." The boy turned and walked off. And that was when Greg, the man who once barked orders behind a register, finally sat down. Not at his desk, on the floor, next to the counter, back against the wall, not in control, just listening. The town had spoken, and their verdict wasn't rage, it was exile. Common truth, if you believe sometimes silence says everything. And stay with us for the final part, because what happens when Alyssa walks back into that cafe for the last time is something no one expected, not even her. Part 5. The Quiet Table by the Window. He left the Purple Heart on the table because she earned it more than him. The cafe was empty when she walked in. No customers, no noise, no smell of hash browns or burnt coffee, just dust in the light and the sound of her own footsteps on worn tile. Alyssa hadn't planned to return, but life has a way of circling back to the places that tried to erase you. And this time, she wasn't here to serve, she was here to remember. It had been 2 weeks since the video went viral, since Greg's voice echoed across the internet like a warning to every worker who ever dared to care, since the Purple Heart became not just a medal, but a symbol of dignity lost and restored. since people started showing up not for meals but for meaning. Greg never came back. He left town in silence, shuttered behind drawn blinds and unanswered calls. Rumor was he'd moved in with a cousin near Durango. Others said he was still here hiding, ashamed to be seen. No one knew for sure, but it didn't matter anymore. Because the town had moved on, the cafe was under new management, now a non-profit veteran-run co-op. The sign out front had changed. It no longer read Sawyer's Grill. It simply said The Table. No branding, no frills, just that. And underneath it, etched into the window, No One Eats Alone. Today was the soft opening. Only staff and volunteers, but they'd asked Alyssa to come early, not as an employee, as something else. They never said what. She stepped through the main dining room, slowly tracing every inch with her eyes. The booths had been cleaned. The wall, once lined with signed menus, now featured framed photos, black and white portraits of local veterans, young faces in old uniforms. There was even one of William taken outside the Danner Center, cup of coffee in hand, smile barely visible beneath the white of his beard. She reached the last booth, the one by the window, the one where he sat that day. Rain had painted the glass that morning. Now the sun streamed in. A patch of warm gold on the table where a folded napkin once held a medal. She sat down. For a moment she didn't move, just breathed, slow, measured. And then from the side room William appeared. He looked older than she remembered, but steadier somehow. His coat was pressed, his scarf tucked neatly. He walked with a cane now, but his posture still held that quiet kind of command, the kind that doesn't ask for respect, just receives it. He sat across from her, hands folded. "You came," he said. "You asked," she replied. He nodded, looked out the window, then reached into his coat. Alyssa expected something small, a note, maybe a thank you. But it wasn't. He pulled out the purple heart. The same one, still bent at the edge, still shining. He placed it between them on the table without a word, then pushed it gently toward her. "I don't need that anymore," he said. "But someone should have it. Someone who reminds people what honor actually looks like." Alyssa blinked. Her throat tightened. "I didn't do anything heroic," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "You did something harder. You were kind when no one told you to be. And that saves people in ways bullets never could." She didn't cry, not yet, but her hand trembled as she placed it over the medal. Just then the new manager entered, a woman named Denise, former Air Force logistics. She smiled, nodded once, and motioned for Alyssa to follow her. They walked into what used to be the back office. Now it was a resource hub, brochures for VA support housing, contacts, legal aid. On the wall behind the desk was a plaque recently mounted. It read, "In honor of those who see what others ignore, dedicated to Alyssa Wren for showing us that service never ends." Alyssa stared at it. Then finally the tears came, not from pain, from release, from being seen, from being heard. She stepped outside for air. The sidewalk was buzzing. A small line of people had begun forming, veterans, students, families, curious strangers. No one wore suits, no one gave speeches, but each one as they entered paused by the table at the window. Some touched the glass. Some whispered a name. Others simply stood quietly remembering. William remained at that table, a presence both silent and steady. When a boy asked if he was famous, he shook his head. "She is," he said, nodding toward Alyssa as she welcomed the next volunteer through the door. Later that afternoon, as the crowd thinned, Alyssa returned to the booth one last time. She placed the purple heart back in its case and handed it to Denise. "Keep it here," she said. "Let it remind people who this place is really for." Denise nodded. "It already has." As Alyssa stepped out into the sun, a reporter caught her for a moment. "What's the one thing you hope people take away from all this?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. That kindness doesn't require permission, and silence is never neutral. She turned, walked down the street, and didn't look back. The camera lingered on the cafe sign, the reflection of sunlight across the words, "No one eats alone." And for a moment, all was still. Now we ask you, the viewer, have you ever seen someone stand up for what's right and pay for it? If yes, comment the word courage below. Because sometimes the people who serve long after the war ends are the ones we least expect. And the battle, it's not always fought with weapons. Sometimes, it's just a plate, a folded napkin, and a quiet table by the window. Share this story if you believe kindness should never cost someone their job. And don't forget, someone out there is still waiting to be seen. Maybe today, you're the one who sees them.